Our speaker today, my husband, Mike Ivey, became interested as a 13-year-old in learning to provide for himself using wilderness survival skills. I can't talk today. Including wild foods foraging. A couple years later, he expanded that quest for self-sufficiency by learning to grow food. Food and food security continue to be important issues for him. Mike?
First, a disclaimer. I already had my speaking date long before I knew that we were having a potluck, and so it's pure coincidence. Okay, this talk is going to be too long. I apologize. I've cut stuff out of it, and I don't think I can cut any more of it and still keep the integrity of the talk. So, sorry. I'm going to be hitting a lot of topics very briefly because I've trimmed it down a lot. So I want to start by just introducing some themes that run through it, and that might help to give context to what follows. The main theme is personal responsibility. Just taking responsibility for educating yourself and responsibility for the consequences of the choices you make. Beyond that, Wendell Berry has said that eating is an agricultural act. And so I will be talking about agriculture. One theme is the small family farm versus the industrial farm. Another theme, natural farming versus chemical farming. I've broken the talk down into three main sections. Kind of arbitrarily, these all interconnect, and so it's just for the sake of organizing. The effects of our choices on animals, the effects on the environment, and the effects on people. So to let you know my perspective on the use of animals for food, 42 years ago I quit eating meat, and before that I ate a lot of meat. I decided I didn't want to do it anymore, and I never missed it. But I chose to not eat meat because I decided that if I could feed myself and stay healthy without killing animals, that's what I wanted to do. So that's my perspective. But I'm not going to spend much time on that because, for one thing, I could talk for 30 minutes on the pros and cons of killing animals for food. But most people have already made a decision on that issue, and so I'm just going to kind of leave that one alone, except to point out that there are some related issues that people sometimes don't give as much thought to. So obviously, if you eat meat, then you are responsible for animals being killed. But also keep in mind, if you drink milk or use dairy products, in order for that cow to produce milk, the cow first produces a calf. And half of those calves are male. Well, male calves are of no use in a dairy herd. So those calves, one way or another, become meat. The lucky ones get to grow up to be young steers and then get turned into meat. The unlucky ones get turned into veal, And if you don't know about veal, educate yourself. You'll never eat it again. The situation with eggs is not quite as dramatic as that, but there is not a whole lot of demand for male chicks. And so hatcheries often just kill at hatching a lot of the males. And then most of the rest of the males grow up, for a few weeks and then get slaughtered. And keep in mind that, in general, farm animals have a really lousy retirement plan. When the milk cows start to taper off too much in their production, they get slaughtered. And when the laying hens start to slack off a little bit, they do too. Also keep in mind, if you eat meat, then you are probably indirectly involved in the killing of predators. Livestock and predators are incompatible, and so the raising of livestock normally entails the killing of predators. On the other hand, if you eat fruits and veggies, then you are probably responsible for the killing of various herbivores. Maybe furry little vertebrates like mice and voles and gophers and groundhogs. Certainly a lot of invertebrates. In order to have your bowl of beans, a lot of bean beetles died. So have to consider, what's the value of the life of an insect versus the life of a steer. And so I'll leave the issue of killing animals at that. But while people disagree about the rightness of killing animals for food, I think all of us would agree that abusing animals and causing them to suffer is wrong. And the industrial farming that takes place today, that provides most of the food in the grocery store, is totally abusive of animals. They are treated as mechanical units of production, and they are subjected to however much abuse they can be subjected to without reducing profits. So if you want to eat meat that comes from an animal that was treated humanely, don't buy it at the grocery store because it ain't there. Any meat that you buy at the grocery store came from an abused animal. That's generally true of eggs also. Yeah, the labeling of eggs gets pretty deceptive. But if you want to eat meat and you want it to be from a humanely treated animal, you can raise it yourself. You can go out and shoot a deer, or you can buy your meat from somebody you trust to tell you the truth about how it was treated. Better yet, visit the farm. And eggs also. It's easy to find local, humanely raised eggs. Just, ask around, check the farmers markets. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the effects of our choices on the environment. And this is actually the longest part of the talk. So I'll start with the effects on climate. First thing to consider there is fossil fuels. Farm equipment, of course, uses fossil fuels. The bigger the bigger the farm, the bigger the machinery, and the more fuel consumption. The processing of food uses quite a bit of energy, and much of that comes from burning fossil fuels. Any kind of processing, canning, freezing, drying, combining a lot of things into processed foods, all takes energy. Transportation is a huge use of fossil fuel in the food industry. If you're buying lettuce from California, then it traveled 3,000 miles by truck to get here. So just that amount of transportation is, a tremendous effect on the CO2 emissions. If you're eating blueberries and raspberries in the middle of winter, they got here by plane, and so a lot of people are cutting back on their flying because of concerns about the environment. Well, if you pay to have your blueberries flown in, then that's kind of a bad trade-off, I think. So be aware, when you buy food, where did it originate and how did it get here? So obviously, the more local or regional you can obtain your food, the better. Refrigeration also requires a lot of energy, much of it from fossil fuel. So that lettuce from California, just to pick on lettuce, in California, that went into refrigeration as soon as it was harvested, stayed refrigerated all through the packaging. It got put on a refrigerated truck and shipped to the grocery store, and then went into the refrigerated produce case at the grocery store. So a lot of energy being used there. And then the final thing on the use of fossil fuels, the manufacturing of chemical fertilizers uses a lot of fossil fuel energy in the process and uses natural gas as a component of the nitrogen fertilizers. So chemical fertilizers are a significant source of CO2 in the atmosphere. Obviously, a way to avoid contributing to that is to avoid foods that were grown chemically. Another greenhouse gas is methane. And yes, it is true what you've heard. Cows are a significant source of methane. Also sheep, goats, and other ruminants. Methane is a natural product of the fermentation in their stomachs, and they regularly release it into the atmosphere primarily by burping, contrary to what you might have heard. So, if you eat beef, then that cow was contributing to global warming. And, well, same with dairy products also, and even goat milk. Another source of methane is manure. Not if it is dealt with in a natural way. If you've got livestock out grazing on a pasture and they're dropping their manure randomly wherever they happen to be, it's actually a benefit. It enriches the pasture. But if you take all those animals and you pack them into a feedlot, then you have an excess of manure in a small space, and it gets piled up somewhere or put in pits or lagoons or whatever, and that creates anaerobic conditions. And anaerobic conditions produce methane. And so our industrial approach to agriculture has turned something that is a valuable fertilizer into a pollutant. And I was very distressed to learn in researching this, the cultivation of rice is a significant source of methane. Rice is grown on flooded fields. Flooded fields create anaerobic conditions, and that produces methane. And it really is a significant source worldwide, given the amount of rice that's cultivated. So I'm re-examining some of my eating habits. And then another very significant issue concerning climate, and one which I have trimmed out of the talk pretty much, is deforestation. It's a huge problem. Much of the deforestation that's taking place in tropical and subtropical areas is for the cultivation of food for export, and a lot of the export is to us. Deforestation, of course, isn't much of an issue in North America because we've already done it. But it'd be nice if we could reforest a little bit, I guess. But the deforestation, like in Brazil, much of it is for raising cattle. And it's different crops in different places, and so I'm going to jump over that because I just don't have time. Okay, then there's pollution. Fertilizer runoff is a big problem. Fertilizers wash off of the fields where they're applied, find their way into the nearest body of water, and wreak havoc with the aquatic ecosystems. This is generally true of chemical fertilizers. People rarely apply enough organic fertilizers to create a runoff problem. The toxicity of pesticides is a problem. Most pesticides are harmful to a great many more living things than the ones they're applied to kill. I don't know if any of you have experienced living in an area that has aerial spraying of large fields. I lived in eastern Washington for a while. They grow wheat there. I doubt that 2 weeks went by any time of the year that the planes weren't out there spraying something on the fields. And none of it was benign, I'm sure. And so you could tell, they sprayed herbicides. You knew that because anybody that had a house that was anywhere near a wheat field, all their trees and shrubs were dead from the drift of the herbicides. And they sprayed poisons for voles. They had voles that would damage the wheat, and fungicides. And so all of that got into the little streams that ran through the area. And those went into the river, and so pretty much, everything out there was contaminated with the pesticides. And then another source of pollution is the pollen from genetically modified plants. That pollen gets transferred to other plants. If somebody nearby is growing non-GMO crops, they can be contaminated from the pollen from the genetically modified ones, and it can It can affect native plants that are of close enough relation to the crop plant, and can affect insects. Been a serious problem with butterflies being killed off with GMO pollen. One way to avoid contributing to all of these issues is avoid chemically grown foods and buy organic and naturally grown whenever possible. Okay. Okay, land use is a concern. And here I'm going to directly address the question of family farms and industrial farms. The traditional small family farm grew a diversity of crops, had fence rows that were grown up with weeds and bushes and sometimes small trees, had woodlot, maybe had windbreaks, had, I'm putting this in past tense, I hope that's not appropriate, but the small family farm normally has, it has diversity, it has natural elements, it provides for wildlife, it maintains the health of the soil. Family farms need to be sustainable because the families intend to continue living there and working the farm, and so it's in their best interest to keep that land as healthy as they can. Industrial farms, on the other hand, are of very large scale. The fields are of large scale. The equipment is of large scale. The fields are cultivated fence to fence. No weeds are tolerated. What fencing there is just clear, herbicided to keep it clear. They're monocropped, generally. You have huge fields of one thing. And so there's no diversity. There are no natural elements. And most industrial farms are chemically farmed, but not all. There is industrial organic. There are large-scale organic farms that just use organic inputs instead of chemical inputs. In terms of how do we want the land to be used, I think we all would like for the land to be used in ways that will sustain the health of the soil and provide for wildlife and provide for people as well. So supporting family farms over industrial farms will help a lot. And there are many other land use issues, especially in other countries that we import food from. And I'm skipping over that also. Water use is a big problem. I think it's absolutely insane that so much of our produce is grown in an arid climate and has to be irrigated. I'll go back to that lettuce from California. Lettuce is about 90% water to start with. It's being grown in a hot, arid climate in California's Central Valley. So that 90% water came from irrigation. And there's a huge competition for water in the West. And so anything that's that's irrigated is taking precious water that has many people competing for. And so it just makes sense to me that whenever possible, we should obtain our food from places that are well suited to the growing of it. Last time I checked, we have no shortage of water around here. So, and I don't mean just here, but the eastern United States generally is pretty well watered. And so, growing more food in this half of the continent just seems sensible to me. Okay, and then I want to address the question of trash. Obviously, packaging is trash. And since recycling has become problematic, just about any packaging is trash. So packaging, of course, takes energy and resources to manufacture it. And if the packaging is plastic, the resources that go into manufacturing it are petroleum products of some sort. And then there's the issue of disposal. And so most of it goes to a landfill. Some of it ends up in the ocean. I guess at least if you dump glass bottles in the ocean, they eventually become beach sand, unlike the plastic. So be aware of packaging, and just because that's what they offer you in the grocery store, don't complacently accept that your food has to come in a lot of packaging. You hunt around, do the best you can, and of course, if you can buy locally from somebody that doesn't need to package their food, then so much the better. I also want to address the question of agricultural plastic. I think Elliot Coleman did the world a great disservice when he popularized plastic greenhouses and hoop houses and high tunnels and low tunnels. A tremendous amount of plastic gets used in agriculture, totaling approximately 1 billion pounds a year in the U.S. And consider that plastic doesn't weigh a whole lot, so 1 billion pounds is a lot of plastic. Plastic is used used as mulch on many farms, both so-called conventional and organic, and the popularity of the plastic greenhouses and hoop houses. It's kind of distressing, I think, because that plastic gets used for a year or two, at best maybe 3, goes to the landfill, gets replaced with more plastic. That plastic is coming from petroleum. So agricultural plastic is not sustainable. So if you go to the farmer's market and you buy a cucumber in May, that was grown under plastic, because I don't think anybody around here has glass greenhouses. So one way to avoid contributing to this use of plastic in agriculture, eat seasonally. Wait and get your cucumber in July. And then finally, on the topic of trash, is food waste. Try to avoid it. Try not to waste food. Now, I don't mean you have to eat everything on your plate, but try not to stock up the fridge with more than you can deal with, and 2 weeks later you're throwing the stuff in the trash. Be appreciative of where that food comes from and what goes into producing it and getting it to you. And if at all possible, compost any food scraps and waste that you have. If you can't do it yourself, see if you have a friend or neighbor who will take your food scraps for compost. If any of you lived close to me, I'd be happy to take it. But try to keep it cycling back into the earth. Okay, final category: the effects of our choices on people. I will start with farmers. Those people that have the family farm, they are making their living from the farm. They are personally invested in the health of that land, the health of their families, and they are generally part of a community. The people that own the industrial farm are usually absentee investors. They may never set foot on the farm. It's an investment. It's a way that they hope to make a profit. And it's run by paid managers that have no personal stake in it. And more often than not, it's a totally unsustainable kind of farming. So, if possible, support the people that are doing it the right way. And then other people to consider are the workers, the agricultural workers. Who are they? How are they treated? What are they exposed to in their work? How well are they paid? In industrial farming, I think the goal would be for the workers to have a retirement plan similar to the livestock. They work until they aren't productive anymore, and then they get rid of them. The workers in processing the food. If people in canneries and other food processing plants, how are they treated? How are they paid? And then the retail workers, wherever you buy your food, how does that company treat its workers, and how well does it pay them? And then the final people we need to consider are our families. We're concerned with the health of our loved ones and ourselves. So how do our choices influence the health of our families? We also need to be concerned with the future that we're creating for children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, etc. How are our choices shaping that future? Yeah. And then also, what values are we modeling for our families? The choices we make we're setting examples. So what are the examples we want to set? So, I would say that the ideal in eating ethically, to eat fresh, local, in season, and organically or naturally grown. That way you are shortening the food distribution chain. You're reducing transportation. You're almost certainly supporting a family farm because no industrial farm sells locally. And it's going to be better for you, better for your family, and better for the community. Now, the problem is that ideal is almost impossible to reach sometimes. If you decide you want some peaches and you can't find local peaches, which is often the case, you can probably find some organically grown peaches from California that were grown with a lot of irrigation and trucked 3,000 miles. Or you can buy some peaches from a family farm down in South Carolina that were brought up here by somebody that runs a produce stand. But they were doused with a lot of deadly chemicals. So, what's your best choice? I hate choices like that. Generally, I start wondering, how bad do I want that peach anyway? But realistically, that's the kind of situation that we are often in. So just try to always be aware of what the consequences of your choice will be, and you just have to decide what the trade-offs are. You know, what will you sacrifice for what? And obviously, if you can buy a lot of your food at the local farmers markets, plural, Abingdon isn't the only farmers market in the world, then that's a good strategy. Grow some of your food if you can, or let your neighbor grow some of your food. Just get their permission before you harvest it. So I just we'll leave you with the approach that I try to take to these things, and that is to try to do the least harm and the most good that I can, given the limitations that I'm faced with. Thank you.